Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight's show is made possible because of Organic Man Coffee Trike, who keeps me caffeinated. Coffee is the lifeblood of my world. 4501 McPherson for the nectar of the gods. If you aren't in Laredo, you can always get the best coffee in the universe by going to organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Their new office hours are 6:30 to 7 p.m. That's 6:30 in the morning. It'd be a little weird if they're only open for a half hour a day, wouldn't it? Sunday, July 16th, 2003, at 2 p.m., I will be speaking at the McAllen Public Library, 4001 North 23rd Street. I'll be telling the story about the flying disc that crashed in Mexico in 1948, 1 year after the Roswell crash. If you'd like to attend, you might want to call ahead. It's not that they're expecting record crowds or anything, it's a small room. If you want to show up and listen to me talk, you can call 956 681 3000, or you can register online at mcallenlibrary.libnet, that's Libnet, .info/events. You hear the term conspiracy theory a lot, especially when you talk to those people that want to shove things down our throats. Things like the Black Plague of 2020, that comes from from people eating bat soup. Uh, how about the elections are secure, so therefore they don't need to do anything to fix them? Uh, Things like Lee Harvey Oswald was the murderer of Kennedy. Just little things like that. Those people say a conspiracy theory is an attempt to explain harmful or tragic events as the result of the actions of a small yet powerful group. Such explanations reject the accepted narrative, the one they want you to accept, surrounding those events. The official version may be seen as further proof of the conspiracy. No matter how bizarre it sounds, they want you to believe it. Just who and when did the idea of a conspiracy theory come out? The term conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist were created by the Central Intelligence Agency following the assassination of President John Kennedy as a way of discrediting people who doubted the government's official report. A conspiracy is a secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful. If a person guilty of a conspiracy knows that a person with whom he conspires to commit a crime has conspired with another person or persons to commit the same crime, he is guilty of conspiring with such other person or persons, whether or not he knows their identity. It can get a bit interesting from here. If you and some other person come up with a plan, say you want to storm Area 51. You tell some friends that they can't shoot all of us, and y'all sit back and laugh about it. Well, then, a couple of days later, your friends show up at Area 51 along with a couple of hundred other dudes, and they run out across the desert, figuring the camo dudes can't shoot all of us. It won't be long before the authorities show up at your door. You weren't even there, but you talked about doing the deed. You made the plan. Therefore, you conspired to break the law. Keep that in mind the next time you have a crazy idea. This is how they got Charles Manson. He laid the plans for the murders, but he wasn't in the building when the killings took place. This is something to keep in mind anytime you have a bizarre idea and you want to tell other people about it. Be careful who you talk to and what you talk about. A theory is a set of accepted beliefs or organized principles that explain and guide analysis. And one of the ways that theory is defined is that it is different from practice when certain principles are tested. For example, you could be a musician who plays well but doesn't have a lot of experience with the theory of music. This word is a noun and it comes from the Greek theoria, which means contemplate or speculate. A theory has yet to be proven, like the theory of evolution. It has never been proven, yet schools just love to shove it down kids' throats. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof, or abridging freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a regress of grievances. Well, that didn't work out as it was written. Why would the CIA want to stop folks from investigating the murder of our 35th president? Why was his body hustled out of Dallas at gunpoint? Who actually shot Officer Tippits? I could go on and on, but the show isn't about that conspiracy theory, but a lot of them. Even though the term wasn't in use yet, I can just picture a bunch of folks in London back in 1775. What do you mean the colonists are going to rebel and form their own country? What have you been drinking? You're some kind of conspiracy theorist. Even today, the idea Kennedy was killed by more than one person is listed as being a conspiracy theory. The United States House of Representatives Select Committee on Assassinations, boy, they just love those long titles, was established in 1976 to investigate the assassinations of John Kennedy, who was murdered in 1963, and Martin Luther King, who was murdered in 1968. They weren't being guided, well, that's not the right word. They weren't being led by the nose around by Alan Dulles, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, who was fired by Kennedy. Just the guy you want looking into the murder of a president. The Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, and the Warren Commission were all criticized for the quality of the investigations carried out and for the way that they informed the taxpayers. The Secret Service was criticized for the weak protection of the president, which was weakened even further between the parade that took place in Houston and in Dallas, which were only one day apart. During the parade in Houston, the HSCA noted that there were 33 motorcycle police officers, 6 of whom were flanking the president's limousine. They were deployed all around the president during his entire time on the streets of Houston. In Dallas, just 24 hours later, they only had 8 officers on motorcycles, and they were just kind of spread out away from the limousine. The HSCA reported that in its own report, the Secret Service's alterations of the Dallas Police Department's original motorcycle deployment plan prevented the use of maximum safety precautions. I wonder why they changed their security just before the parade. In particular, the various investigations performed by the U.S. government were faulted for insufficient consideration of the possibility of a conspiracy in each case. The committee, in its report, also made recommendations for legislative and administrative improvements, including making some assassinations a federal crime. In 1963, shooting Kennedy was a state crime, not federal. The Secret Service had zero murder investigative authority and no jurisdiction for stopping the autopsy that was about to get underway as to what happened to Kennedy in Dealey Plaza. As soon as President Kennedy was declared dead, a team of armed Secret Service agents took possession of the body, screaming profanities and brandishing their guns. They refused to permit the Dallas Medical Examiner to conduct an autopsy, which is required under Texas law. The Secret Service was intent on getting the body out of Dallas. They wanted to leave Parkland Hospital, take President Kennedy's body over to Air Force One, where Lyndon Johnson was waiting for it. They're going to put it into the hands of the military, which then conducted an autopsy under highly secret and highly bizarre circumstances. The guys doing the autopsy had never done an autopsy on a gunshot victim in their lives, and yet they were in charge of Kennedy's autopsy. Makes you go, 1991, with the release of Oliver Stone's movie JFK, which was based on the book Crossfire by Jim Marrs. If you haven't read the book yet, what are you waiting for? The movie was okay, but the book was far more informative. There were some things in the book that didn't make it onto the big screen. The movie put forth the theory that assassination of John Kennedy was a regime change operation carried out by the U.S. national security establishment as a consequence of the friction between JFK, the national security establishment over the Cold War, his handling of Cuba, and the Soviet Union. Why theory? The proof is all locked away in secret records being held by the Secret Service, the CIA, the FBI, and other agencies. All they needed was a release of these records to turn theory into fact. At the end of the movie, there was a trailer telling the audience about the vast amount of official records relating to the murder federal officials were keeping secret from the American people. The Warren Report, the official government report that said Kennedy was killed by a lone gunman who was allegedly an ex U.S. Marine communist, was released telling the American people that the official records relating to the assassination would not be released for 75 years, by which time many people living in 1963 would be dead, especially those involved in the conspiracy. Every time I read this, I wonder who were they trying to protect and why? Kennedy was murdered. The crime was investigated by a bunch of politicians with no training, and most of the evidence was ignored. People seeing the movie began to yell and scream. They wanted the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. Congress enacted the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992. See what I mean about these long titles? It was better known as the JFK Records Act. The law mandated that all federal agencies would release their JFK related records to the public. That's you and me. The deadline for release would be 25 years after the enactment of the act, when tens of thousands of long held secret records relating to the assassination would finally be disclosed. I still wonder, why wait 25 years? Was it going to take them 25 years to go through the records and make sure that nothing secret was being divulged? Why not just say, okay, you guys have 1 month. Get that paperwork ready because we're coming for it. But no, they said 25 years. Moving at the speed of government. If I owe the IRS $5, I wish that's all I owed them. They want their money yesterday. If they owe me $50, it takes all year to get the check out of them. To enforce the law, Congress created the Assassination Records Review Board, better known as the ARRB. I almost called it that other thing. More politicians and their kids in need of work. This was to go from 1992 to 1998. After the enactment of the law, the National Archives specifically advised the Secret Service of the requirements of this law. The Secret Service proceeded to knowingly, deliberately, and intentionally destroy records relating to the Secret Service protection of the president during other trips taken in the fall of 1963. Records that would have shown just how much and how badly the security had been changed for November 22nd, 1963. The boxes that contained the destroyed records were labeled "Retain permanently" for eventual transfer to the National Archives or a presidential library. The records would have served as a point of comparison to the Secret Service security measures prior to Dallas and those that were taken, well, actually not taken, while in Dallas. Things like, why were all the Secret Service guys riding on a car behind the president? Why did the parade route take so many turns where the drivers all had to slow way down? Why was there no rooftop security? Secret Service officials knew that the law prohibited the destruction of the records, and they proceeded to destroy them anyway. Once the dirty deed was done, the folks in charge didn't bother to say anything to the ARRB. 1995, the ARRB found out about the destruction of government files. July 25th, 1995, Review Board Chairman John Tenham sent a powerfully worded letter to the Director of the Secret Service registering the Review Board's displeasure about its recent discovery that the two boxes in question had been destroyed a half a year previously. The letter from John Tunham, addressed directly to the head of the Secret Service, was a powerful signal that the review board was immensely displeased and took matters very seriously. Very seriously. Wow. A powerfully worded letter. Ooh, I'm scared. I'll bet the Secret Service was scared. They were hiding under their desks. Ooh, don't touch that lip. Now I'm starting to sound like somebody else. Anyway, I can't help it. It's that kind of a situation. Yeah. Yes, I'll bet the Secret Service were quite fearful that the ARRB was coming for them. Well, the ARRB said they were going to hold hearings in which they were going to get to the bottom of who at the Secret Service had screwed up, not only by allowing President Kennedy to get shot, but by also destroying all those records. It was going to be open to the public. The press was going to be there filming as the ARRB grilled the Secret Service to get to the bottom of things. Just like many things in Washington, they never got around to holding the hearings. The Secret Service went on about their daily routine. No one was ever held accountable for destroying those records. No criminal indictments were ever issued against Secret Service officials for what was clearly a crime of obstruction of justice and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The guy in charge of the Secret Service wasn't going to go down into the records department and grab those files, take them back to his office, and shred them. He would have told one of his underlings to go do it. The underlings would have seen the label on the boxes and simply ignored them. More than one person was involved, which makes this a conspiracy. And since we can't prove it, it becomes a conspiracy theory. The kind of activity isn't anything new. It's been going on for as far back as written records can be found. The trouble I have with being done in our country is we are supposed to be a republic, a nation ruled by laws, not a bunch of despots. Our elected officials are supposed to be in charge, but they're not. One of the longest running conspiracy theories is what crashed in Roswell back in 1947. Okay, actually, the crash took place in Corona, New Mexico, which is on the Foster Ranch, 106 miles northwest from Roswell. The Army came out and said, "Hey, we got a flying disc." And the next day they said, "Oh, wait a minute, it was just a weather balloon." The Army had several units of men out scouring the Foster Ranch, picking up balloon fragments. The debris field was said to be about the size of a football field. That's a lot of balloon fragments. Then they ran around threatening people to keep their mouths shut. The infamous photo of Major Jesse Marcel holding up that radar target look closely at his feet. You can see the packaging that the target came in spread out on the floor. The balloon target was brought in from the storage room, laid out on the floor for the reporters. The look on Major Marcel's face kind of says it all. To begin with, Major Marcel had just returned from radar school. He would have been very familiar with what a balloon target or a weather balloon looked like. He was the base intelligence officer, the one and only nuclear weapons base in the world. Yet, folks want to believe that he couldn't tell the difference between a crashed flying saucer and a weather balloon. I know we make fun of Army intelligence all the time, at least when I was in the Army, we did. It was the end of World War II, and they kind of had their act together at that time, not like it changed into later. Brigadier General Ramey did not come up with the balloon excuse on his own. There were dozens of Army guys above his pay grade who would have been calling the shots. The whole bunch of generals would have been on the phone trying to explain away the crashed disc. But why? The U.S. military fostered the intrigue by initially claiming that the recovered debris was from a flying disc, before announcing that the wreckage belonged to a weather balloon. Little bit of a difference there. In 1994, it was finally revealed that the balloon was part of a top secret Project Mogul, which sought to detect Soviet nuclear bomb tests. Project Mogul was secret, but not the balloons being used. They were made from rubber, balsa wood, and aluminum foil. Once again, Major Marcel would have known what the thing on the Foster Ranch was if it had been a balloon. The crash victims were all mannequins being dropped from high altitude tests. The life size dummies were used in high altitude parachute drops from 1954 until 1959 as part of the Air Force's project codenamed High Dive and Excelsior. Talk about a scientific breakthrough. They dropped dummies in 1954 and they hit the ground in 1947. Time travel, anyone? A group of Army and then Air Force generals got together and decided what the American people should know about our place in the universe. At the time, President Truman would have been aware of what was going on, but most of Congress would have been kept in the dark. Our elected officials were not given information that could be necessary for the nation's security. The military is not in charge of our country, Congress is. Or they were at one time. I've said it on a show a few times in the past. The military sometimes do not look favorably on the folks they are sworn to protect. When I'm talking about the military, I'm talking about the guys who get in and they stay well past their serve by date. The elected officials are only in office for a few years. Well, some of them do stay way too long. There should be a limit on how long anyone can be in Washington, not just in office, but any position where they can make decisions on how our country is run. Every senator or House of Representatives who is no longer in office should have to return to their home state for 10 years before they can go back to Washington. Instead, when they can no longer win an election, they get a job working for some lobbyist group. How often do you see some senator retire, head back home to face the folks that he's been annoying for the past 6 years? How about some age limits as well? Good Lord, Congress is beginning to look like a retirement home. If you want me and a few of my fellow conspiracy theorists to ignore your findings, put case closed in the title. The Roswell Report, case closed, came out July 1994 from the Office of the Secretary of the Air Force, and they concluded an exhaustive search for records in response to the General Accounting Office inquiry of an event popularly known as the Roswell incident. The focus of the GAO probe, initiated at the request of a member of Congress, was to determine if the U.S. Air Force or any other U.S. government agency possessed information on the crash and recovery of an extraterrestrial vehicle and its alien occupants near Roswell, New Mexico, July 1947. Those people in Washington just love to put in a lot of extra words. 1994, the Air Force report concluded that the predecessors of the U.S. Air Force was the U.S. Army Air Force, recovered debris from an Army Air Force balloon-borne research project codenamed Mogul. Records located describing research carried out under the Mogul project, most of which were never classified, were collected, provided to the GAO, and published in one volume for ease of access for the general public. I believe the volume is like that thick. The report discusses the results of this exhaustive research and identifies the likely source of the claims of alien bodies at Roswell. Contrary to allegations, many of the accounts appear to be descriptions of unclassified and widely publicized Air Force scientific achievements. Other descriptions of bodies appear to be actual incidents in which Air Force members were killed or injured in the line of duty. Those little green men with the big eyes and the big heads, those were actually pilots. Well, at least that's what they're trying to tell us. At one time, the press were the watchdogs of the government for the people. Now the press is the public relations department for the Department of Truth. At one time, reporters learned how to dig into a story and tell the public what was going on behind the scenes. And now they tell the public what the folks in charge want us to believe. Surprisingly, or maybe not, the records for the Roswell Army Air Base from 1947 were all accidentally destroyed. Where have I heard that before? You can find military records for who all served in the Civil War, how much they were paid, what they did once the fighting was over. But the records for Roswell, they're all gone. The evidence is overwhelming that the terrorist attacks September 11th, 2001 were indeed the result of a conspiracy. A conspiracy by Osama bin Laden and a crew of mostly Saudi hijackers. The trouble is, we're not always allowed, or we aren't allowed to see any of the evidence proving that this is what happened. I wish I had never watched that video that showed how the buildings collapsed. And now I have questions that will probably never get answered. As each floor comes down, there's a puff of black smoke just prior to the collapse. The government explains this as being air being pushed out of the floors as they come together. Shouldn't it be white and not black? Oh well, what do I know? Things that make people think we're not being told the truth are things like how a guy called Lucky Larry Silverstein, try that again, Lucky Larry Silverstein got his nickname after a series of close calls and bittersweet victories stemming from the September 11th incident. A lot of people lost their lives in the attack. Many people lost their income as well because their offices no longer existed. One man ended up very rich from the whole thing. New York property tycoon Larry Silverstein purchased the entire complex in a 9-year lease 6 months prior to the attacks. The deal was worth $124 million, but he walked away with $4.5 billion after taking out a huge insurance claim months before the planes hit the tower. His first job as the new owner was to change the company responsible for security at the complex. I used to work with a guy who was a security guard at the World Trade Center before the companies were changed. He was very upset about being laid off until September 12th when he realized he was lucky to still be alive. If he hadn't have been fired, well, he wouldn't have made it. He wouldn't have had long to be upset about. The new security company was Securicom, which was run by George Bush's brother, Marvin Bush, and his cousin, Wirt Walker III. According to public records, Securicom also provided security for the World Trade Center and it covered Dulles International Airport, the United Airlines took off from, where the hijackers all managed to get on those planes. Mr. Silverstein also explicitly included terrorist attack as a clause in the new insurance agreement. On the day of the attack, Lucky Larry had a doctor's appointment, so he wasn't in his office or even in the building at that unfortunate moment. Uh, his daughter Lisa had skipped work at the same day for unknown and unexplained reasons, and his son was running late for work. The entire family was away from the site of the attack. How convenient. What a coincidence. The two towers were a smoking mess in the streets of New York. Some official began clearing the rescuers away, saying they were going to drop Building 7. Building 7 didn't look as if it was damaged all that much. Broken glass, as far as I could see, but I wasn't there at the time. Building 7, why did they say they were going to drop it? And how did they drop it? It was there, and then a minute later, it wasn't. Why was that building destroyed as well as the towers? In the news coverage following the attack, they kept showing those huge steel I beams sticking up out of the ground. The I beams should have been bent or torn into pieces. The tops of many of them looked like they'd been cut at an angle in a straight 45-degree line. I went back and I looked at the images on the internet, and I can't find any that show how the I beams looked. Not saying they were cut, they just looked like they'd been cut. Just can't find those images anymore. Perhaps my mind is faulty. Maybe I'm having a Mandela effect moment. I remember seeing the tops of the beams looking as if they were cut at an angle, which could have been done using explosives. I must be wrong. Or somebody went back and changed all the images. No, that would be a conspiracy, wouldn't it? And it's just my theory. Since 9/11, I've read dozens of books, watched videos, and talked to people who all have different ideas on what happened. Martha Stewart was sent to prison for insider trading, something the folks in Washington get away with all the time. She must have upset the wrong bunch of politicians. Knowing what is going to happen days or even hours beforehand and investing in or selling off your stock is illegal. Well, for us little guys. Someone seems to have advanced notice of the attacks. Some investors bet heavily against the stocks of companies that would be impacted by the attack. On September 10th, 2001, the day before the attacks, options for United Airlines and American Airlines stocks were unusually high. Unusually high. United and American stocks fell sharply in the aftermath of 9/11. That produced huge profits for the investors who had sold off all of their airline stocks. Bets on the stocks of companies that would be impacted by the attack started well in advance. There was a significant increase in the volume of options tied to United, American, and Boeing stocks between August 10th and September 10th. Was it a conspiracy? Well, yes, a lot of folks were involved in the attack. Do we know who all was involved? Not by a long shot. To make matters worse, no matter who comes out with irrefutable evidence to prove or disprove their case, half of the people out there will not be convinced. Our government has lied to us many times, and it's gotten to a point where, in order for us to believe what they're saying, well, they're going to have to really convince us. Or a lot of people in Washington are going to have to be voted out of office and replaced with fresh faces and people that maybe we can trust. Let's add a little more mud to the already thick mess. September 10th, it was announced that the Pentagon had misplaced a little bit of cash. Donald Rumsfeld announced, according to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. Folks at the Pentagon were beginning to investigate to try to find this missing money, or at least figure out who it was that lost it. I've lost my wallet a few times, but I've never lost a pile of money as big as my house. The accounting office doing the search was right where the American Airlines Flight 77 hit. The entire section of the building was destroyed, along with every scrap of paper needed to look for the missing money. As the country came together, sort of, to get even with whoever did this horrible thing, nobody bothered to ask, whatever happened to that $2.3 trillion that was missing? Everybody forgot about it. That was the last thing on my mind. Was this just some kind of a cosmic coincidence, or was there some connection between the missing money and the folks who conspired to attack our country and drag us into a war? This is not the only time those responsible for taking care of our money have had some issues. When an account discrepancy occurs that cannot be traced, it is customary to make what is called an undocumented adjustment. That would be like if you didn't like what the balance in your bank looked like, you just took an eraser and you erased the amount and you change it. Same thing. In 1999, the amount that the Pentagon adjusted was 8 times the Department's budget for that year. It was 1/3 greater than the entire federal budget. In plain English, the Pentagon had adjusted their budget by increasing it 800%. By 2015, the amount reported missing by the Office of the Inspector General had increased to 6.5 trillion, and that was just for the Army. Using public data from federal data banks, Mark Skidmore, a professor of economics at Michigan State University, found that 21 trillion in unsupported adjustments had been reported by the Defense Department and the Housing and Urban Development Department between 1998 and 2015. That's about $65,000 for each and every American. The median household income in the United States in 2015 was $56,000. The government's initial auditors had made zero headway in finding any of the missing money. Jim Maneri of the Defense Finance and Accounting Service traveled the country in 2002 looking for documents relating to $300 million worth of unrecorded spending. We knew it's gone. We don't know what they spent it on, he said. He was reassigned after suggesting that higher ups had covered up the problem by writing it off. He's not the only person who thinks so. The books are cooked routinely every year, said former defense analyst Franklin Spinney. According to a 2013 Reuters report, the Pentagon is the only federal agency that has not complied with a 1996 law that requires annual audits of the all government's departments. The Pentagon has spent tens of billions of dollars to upgrade more efficient technology in order to become audit ready. Many of these new systems failed and were scrapped. Billions of dollars spent on software that didn't work. The government did not even try to correct the problem, even after investigators began sounding the alarm. Skidmore contacted the Office of the Inspector General, but was not permitted to speak to anyone who had worked on the corruption report. Both the Congressional Budget Office and the Government Accountability Office assured him that congressional hearings would have been held if there was a significant problem. When Rumsfeld eventually did appear before Congress in March 2005, he offered no answers. The military doesn't know how its budget is being spent. The total military expenditures that analysts so confidently cite are whatever the Treasury Department says they are. The individual line items, at least for the Army, are for the most part unknown. If money is being diverted from the armed forces to losses or degrading or being try that again. If money is being diverted from the armed forces, the losses are degrading our defense capability in ways difficult to observe. The same is true on a smaller scale of the Department of Urban Housing Development or the Department of Housing and Urban Development, where billions in missing expenditures could have gone to support the perennial cash strapped federal mortgage loan program and possibly other unrelated programs without congressional knowledge or approval. Even better, it could have been left in our bank accounts so that we, the people, could maybe pay some of our bills better. I read a report that said that the Department of Housing and Urban Development will take a house valued at, say, $150,000, and then they'll spend $300,000 fixing it up to sell it for $150,000. Would this qualify as a conspiracy theory? There were several people all involved who must have planned on how they were going to ask for the money and then spend it on unknown projects. possibly a little offshore banking was going on as well. We have no proof at this time as to who was involved, how much money was actually taken, or where it all went. If all that money was being spent on, oh, say, deep underground military bases, at least it was being used for national defense, kind of. If, on the other hand, it was all going to vacations and luxury housing for a few top brass, well, then there should be a bunch of FBI agents all zeroing in on them. The FBI doesn't seem interested in what's going on with the budget. Here is one that is guaranteed to make some folks mad. The 1969 moon landing by Apollo 11 was faked. Okay, I'm not saying it was faked. That's what other people are saying. It's a conspiracy theory. Well, actually, I am saying it was fake because the words came out of me, but I sort of believe it happened. I'm going to get emails on that one. I can hear the crowd already. I watched the landing on TV. Our school had two TVs, one on the first floor and one on the second floor. As the big event was coming to a head, all the classes were marched out into the hallway so we could watch a black and white TV at the far end of the hallway. Neil Armstrong comes diddy bopping down that ladder and he says, we all know what he said. Buzz Aldrin joined him a short time later, and history was made. You do have to ask, why did NASA have a huge sound stage built showing the lunar landing module sitting in moon dirt in Las Vegas? Even the Sean Connery movie Diamonds Are Forever has a scene where James Bond is running from the bad guys. He runs into a TV soundstage and he sprints across the stage where the astronauts are pretending to be on the moon. Yes, NASA had a huge soundstage built that looked like the surface of the moon with a landing craft on it, and they had people dressed like astronauts walking around and they were filming it. But why? I'll admit there's a very good chance that we did land on the moon in 1969. However, everything that the astronauts said was written out on a script. They were trained to say things like about how the Earth looks from 238,855 miles away. The rocket scientists didn't trust a bunch of jet jockeys to have enough wherewithal to speak about what they were looking at. People want to believe our Nazi rocket scientists were better than the Soviet Nazi rocket scientists. To add to the confusion, many folks say that when Armstrong and Aldrin were out walking on the moon, they were not alone. They are reported to have said there were alien spacecraft lined up along the edge of a crater. NASA has all the photographs taken while away from Earth touched up, so those of us paying for all that rocket scientists never get to see what's going on out there. We can't handle the truth, or more likely, the truth will make us want more answers than NASA is willing to offer. Astronauts have two radio channels to use while talking to Earth. One you can listen in on, the other is secret. Why? What could a bunch of people in outer space have to say that could possibly be of national security interests? Maybe something like, oh, look, they don't have green skin after all. NASA is a civilian agency, but it's run by the military. When they come out and say there are no structures on the Mars or on the moon, and they know that there actually is, well, the folks making these decisions are conspiring to lie. I know they're fudging the truth because they come out with different stories on a regular basis. Which particular story is true and which is not? All this is a conspiracy theory. A very touchy subject is the mass shootings that take place all over our country. What I've noticed, and a few of my friends have noticed as well, is just about any time some politician gets in hot water for some misdeed, found out by accidental reporter integrity, a mass shooting takes place. It's almost as if it covers up the original story. Now, I can't say for sure that there's a connection. Maybe politicians do so many illegal things it just works out that way. Good Lord, are we being governed by a bunch of folks with little to no scruples or morals? Most, if not all, of these mass shootings are using some kind of very dangerous, mind altering chemicals, which are being handed out by doctors like Halloween candy. It seems as if half the kids in school right now are on some kind of a SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. They are the most commonly prescribed antidepressants. Are kids really all that depressed? Or are we being told they are that way so that some particular companies can make a lot of money selling pills that most people don't really need? Some kid isn't doing well in class because he's up all night watching YouTube on his cell phone. In class, he has very little attention. He's not paying attention to what the teacher is saying. His grades are not very good unless he's decided he wants to work at the Golden Arches. His folks drag him in to see Dr. Pill Pusher. The doctor looks at the kid and he thinks, if I can push a few more hundred of these SSRIs, I can get that all expense paid trip to Hawaii, where I will learn more about SSRIs. He convinces the parents that their son needs these pills in order to pay attention in class. The kid seems to be doing a little better in class now, but now he's hyperactive. It's a side effect of SSRIs. The doctor prescribes something to deal with this hyperactivity. Now the kid can't sleep at night. Also, a side effect of methylphenidate. The kid rattles when he walks because he's taking pills for everything. Better living through chemical dependency. A simpler fix would be to simply take Junior's cell phone away and then see if his grades improve. Why are so many kids being given drugs to calm them down and to perk them up and to make them sleep at night and to wake up in the morning? Something ain't right there. Area 51 is shot full of bizarre things that nobody will tell us about. There are huge companies experimenting with things to keep us safe from those people. We pay our taxes, and a lot of the money gets funneled to private companies that are doing government work. These companies are being paid to work on things that once they invent them, they'll bring in more money for these private companies. But we only get the benefit of being told that we are safe from those people. Are we any safer right now as opposed to, say, October 1962? Russia had put in a bunch of missiles in Cuba, and Kennedy told them, nay, nay, not in our backyard. During initial construction, far more building materials were shipped into Area 51 than can be accounted for by looking at the base. This led folks to realize that the base is far bigger than it would appear, most of which is underground. As more study is done on the secret base, it comes to light that the place is connected by underground tunnels that go all over the country and possibly all over the world. Maybe this is where that $2.3 trillion went. This in itself isn't so much of a conspiracy theory as just massive government spending. The idea of alien technology being studied at Area 51 is. Our government pays private companies to study technology that has been given to them. Any discoveries made by these companies become enormously wealthy. We get to watch a bunch of people trekking up Tikaboo Peak to try to get a closer look at the base. When I was growing up, I was told that I was going to have a flying car when I was older. Well, I'm older, and I still don't have that flying car, and I want one. I don't know what I would do with it. Crash probably, but dang it, I want a flying car. Okay. As far as the Black Plague of 2020 goes, was that a conspiracy? I don't know. Actually, it could have been just a huge mistake. We may never know all the details. Now, I do believe that a lot of people got together and they used this outbreak to make millions of dollars and push the world in a direction favorable for them, but not so much for us. Just look at the reaction of those in control of things like social media. Just saying anything about how crazy the whole thing was, could get you bumped from every platform. I like the social distancing. I had started years before everybody else. Those drive-by parties were great, as long as they didn't last too many minutes. Here is a funny story for y'all. My wife got really sick, not from the plague, it was something else. Of course, she was locked away in a hotel in a hospital room, and I had to jump through hoops just to get in and see her. I had to talk to a sheriff's deputy who was guarding the door, and then a nurse had to come take my temperature, and they had to look in my eyes to make sure I was okay to go in and visit my own wife for a few minutes. Well, she managed to survive their nasty treatment, and she refused to take any of the prescription drugs that they told her she had to have, or she wasn't going to make it. The doctors wanted her taking about 6 different meds. She's like me, she doesn't really like pills, and so she said no. The doctor said that my wife would be back in the hospital within a few months. That's been about 2.5 years ago, and she feels great. Her birthday was coming around, and her sisters got together to hold a drive-by party. I got Lulu out the door and sitting at the curb at the appointed time. And cars began going by. Lots of cars. Way too many cars. Remember, I said I like really short, fast drive-bys? The cars would pull up, they'd stop, and they'd talk to my wife, from a distance, telling her how glad they were to see she was still alive and how they hoped she would get better. A lot of them would hand out presents, a lot of presents. We had birthday presents stacked up in the driveway. Most of the kids from her school came by, even the ones that were doing the online schooling. I got to noticing there were school teachers from places that she used to work years ago. All of her friends came by. The line of cars literally went around the block and then some. We later found out that there were actually two drive-by parties going on at the exact same moment. The one her sisters had arranged and one that her coworkers had arranged. They just both had coincidentally decided to show up right at 7 o'clock. They came from two different directions, and then they had to kind of squeeze the cars in between each other. My wife seems to be one of those people that darn near everybody likes. You could say we are opposites for sure. Why she likes me, I have no idea, but I like her. Anyway, one of those weird things. The plague was a huge mistake that was used by a few to make unheard of profits while at the same time driving small businesses out of town. Our favorite restaurant closed, Pat's Kitchen. They were they did their best to try to push through the situation, but they just couldn't handle it. Online shopping went into overdrive, while folks who put every dime they had into small retail operations had to sit there and watch as their dreams went down the drain. The Phoenix bookstore tried to do online shopping, but they could not compete with those gigundous stores from other states. What was up with the toilet paper? Come on. On a podcast I listen to on a regular basis, a truck driver said that during the big toilet paper crisis, she would deliver paper products to a warehouse that was full to the breaking point with toilet paper, while at the same time, stores were rationing out the paper 3 or 4 squares at a time. Okay, maybe not, but like 2 or 3 rolls. I remember going into the store. There was a police officer sitting there in front of a pile of toilet paper, and I asked him, "Did they train you for this?" He laughed. It's like, "No, they told me to make sure nobody gets into a fight over toilet paper." Boy, I would use any excuse possible to get out of the house. We need a can of tuna to make lunch. I'd jump in my truck. I'd drive to the store. A lot of people gave me dirty looks because I like to walk around without the mask on. Even, this is after that was mandatory when they said you don't have to wear the mask. So I'd walk around without the mask, and mothers would grab their kids and they'd drag them away like I was a pervert or something. Uh, Lots of dirty looks from people. I was so happy when they finally took down those plastic barriers. It made the stores look so much bigger. Oh well, that was a completely different situation than any of us were prepared for. The whole mask thing was like hiding under your desk after a nuclear bomb had been dropped a mile away. A virus is so small it would zip right through those cloth thingies that folks had on their faces. And here's the funny part: I would see people pull their mask down, put something in their mouth. I mean, they're wearing gloves and everything, yet they're sitting there eating candy or food or something, and then they'd put the mask back on. Go to a restaurant, you'd see these people that come in, mask on, they'd sit down at the table, they would pull the mask down to eat dinner, lunch, whatever, then put the mask back on so they could walk out of the restaurant. I don't get it. It made no sense to me. Now, if you're one of those people, you felt you had to do that, I'm sorry you feel that way. The face diaper is annoying. I still have mine around here somewhere. Has a picture of a TARDIS on it from Doctor Who. According to some sources, more conspiracy theorists, of course, the Great Depression got started when a group of billionaires began telling people there wasn't enough money in the banks to cover their deposits. These billionaires told people that they would be wise to pull all their cash out of the banks while there was still any left. This led to a run on the banks, which caused hundreds of small town banks to all close. As these small banks would fold, the billionaires would move in, put in one of their banks in the town, thus squeezing all the small banks out of existence. Kind of like how all those big companies got bigger as the small ones all kind of went away, like the dodo birds. All because people were afraid to go shopping and use their computers or their cell phones instead. The fear was escalated by all these news shows depicting huge piles of bodies that were all proven to have been taken from movies. The folks on the internet who were all saying that they knew someone who knew someone else who knew about a small island somewhere where all the inhabitants had been killed off by the Black Plague of 2020. I doubt anyone foresaw the outcome of all that fear mongering as becoming as big as it did. How many people committed suicide thinking the world had come to an end, which in a way it had, the world that we knew? How many people did not receive medical treatment because their clinics were all closed or they had so many restrictions involved that you couldn't get in and see a doctor without an act of Congress? How many small businesses were lost because of the overreaction to the Black Plague? The ones who did benefit from this global pandemic were the super huge stores, politicians, and drug companies. We can't prove any one group of people were responsible for this world shaking event. We can only theorize and ponder what group of folks conspired to change the course of the entire world so they could make a buck. What's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? Time. Hope I didn't upset too many people out there listening to the show. Uh, Hopefully, I'll still have a show next week. If you like this shirt, you can get one just like it from tpublic.com. If you'd like to read one of my books, you can find them at amazon.com. Yes, one of the big stores. You can also find them at the Organic Man Coffee Trike right here in Laredo on McPherson. Tell your friends that they should be listening to the show as well, and we'll see if I'm back next week. Till next time, this is Chris James for Strange Things.